The silence in my life had become a physical presence, a weight that settled in the corners of my studio and clung to the canvases I could no longer bring myself to finish. For months, my work had felt stagnant, my existence a loop of coffee, blank stares, and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. The garden behind my house, once a source of inspiration, was just another patch of green the first had to maintain. It was in a fit of desperate, what-the-hell energy that I decided it needed a sculpture. Something big, something permanent and unmoving that could stare back at the sky with more conviction than I could. I found him through a recommendation from the guy at the local hardware store. "Cole's the best," he'd said, wiping grease from his hands onto an already filthy rag. "Works with steel like it's clay. Bit of a quiet fella, but his hands do the talking," the man had added, with a conspiratorial wink. "And ladies, watch out." I'd given a tight, polite smile. Of course. When Cole arrived for the consultation, he was exactly what the hardware guy's comment had implied. He filled the doorway of my studio, not just with his size, but with an aura of quiet capability. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his plain gray t-shirt. His hair was dark and cut short, and a day's worth of stubble shadowed a jaw that looked like it could take a punch. He smelled of something clean and metallic, like fresh rain on iron. He was, in a word, aggressively straight. The kind of man who belonged on a billboard for durable work boots or domestic beer. The kind of man I had taught myself long ago not to look at for too long. He moved with an economy of motion, his eyes scanning my preliminary sketches with an unreadable expression. His hands were what I noticed most. They were large and calloused, with faint silver scars tracing lines across his knuckles. These were hands that bent metal to their will. Hands that created. They made my own, perpetually stained with paint, but otherwise soft, look useless. "This is ambitious," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. He tapped a finger on the central spiral of my design. "You want this whole section to feel like it's floating. It's an illusion. It'll need a hell of a hidden support." "That's the idea," I managed, my own voice sounding thin in comparison. He looked up from the paper, and his gaze met mine. His eyes were a deep, clear hazel, and for a moment, they weren't assessing the drawing, but me. I felt a familiar, stupid flutter in my chest, an old ghost of hope I'd learned to ignore. I looked away first, focusing on a smudge of ultramarine blue on my thumb. "I can do it," he said, the statement flat and confident. "It'll take a few weeks. I'll need to work on-site for the final assembly and welding." And just like that, he was a fixture. The quiet of my backyard was replaced by the shriek of a grinder, the percussive clang of a hammer on steel, and the violent, hungry hiss of a welding torch. Cole set up his equipment near the stone patio, a small kingdom of raw materials and powerful tools. He worked with a focused intensity that was mesmerizing. I set up my easel by the large bay window in my studio, pretending to paint, but mostly, I just watched him. I watched the sun catch the sweat on his brow as he hoisted a heavy sheet of steel into place. I watched the muscles in his back and arms contract and release, a beautiful, functional anatomy lesson. He moved with a grace that defied his size, a powerful dance of creation happening right outside my window. He was a piece of living sculpture himself, more compelling than anything I could ever hope to create on canvas or in steel. Days bled into one another. We fell into a strange, silent routine. I'd make a pot of coffee in the morning and leave a mug for him on the patio railing. He'd nod his thanks, a small, clipped gesture, and that would be the extent of our interaction until lunch. I'd eat a sandwich at my easel. He'd sit on an overturned bucket, eating methodically from a lunchbox that looked like it had seen a decade of job sites. We existed in parallel orbits, separated by a pane of glass and a universe of assumptions. My internal monologue, however, was a raging torrent. I analyzed every micro-expression, every gesture. When he glanced toward the studio window, was he looking at the house, or was he looking for me? When his lips tightened in concentration, was it frustration with the metal, or something else? I was a detective investigating a crime that hadn't happened, dusting for fingerprints on thin air. It was pathetic, this quiet obsession, this building of a fantasy around a man who likely thought of me only as the client. The first time he touched me, it was an accident. I was on a small stepladder, trying to rehang a wind chime the birds had knocked loose from a low-hanging branch. The ladder wobbled on the uneven flagstones. A hand, solid and warm, landed on the small of my back, steadying me. "Careful." Cole's voice was low, right behind me. The contact was brief, impersonal, and purely functional, but it sent a jolt through my entire system. His palm was a brand of heat against the thin cotton of my shirt. I could feel the texture of his calluses, the sheer strength held in check. I froze, my hand still clutching the chime. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. "Thanks," I mumbled, stepping down quickly, putting distance between us. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. He just grunted in response and went back to his work, the moment apparently meaning nothing to him. For me, it was everything. The spot on my back tingled for the rest of the day, a phantom limb of sensation. My mind replayed the simple, steadying touch on a loop, dissecting it, imbuing it with a significance it almost certainly did not possess. It was a dangerous game, this projection of my own loneliness onto the blank canvas of a handsome stranger. A stranger who was, I reminded myself for the 100th time, completely and utterly straight. A week later, a storm rolled in. The sky turned a bruised purple-gray, and the wind began to whip through the trees, tearing at the tarps Cole had used to cover the half-finished sculpture. I saw him from the window, fighting to secure a corner that had come loose, the heavy canvas snapping like a sail. Without thinking, I ran outside. The rain came suddenly, a cold, hard deluge. We were both soaked in seconds. "Grab that rope," he yelled over the roar of the wind, and I did, my clumsy fingers fumbling with the knot. We worked together, a frantic, unspoken choreography against the elements. He moved with purpose, anticipating the wind's next gust, while I mostly tried to stay out of his way and do what he told me. At one point, our shoulders brushed as we pulled a tarp taut. Another jolt, another moment of contact that felt both accidental and profound. When the sculpture was finally secure, we stood there, drenched and breathing hard, the rain plastering our hair to our heads and our clothes to our skin. His gray t-shirt was dark and translucent, clinging to the hard planes of his chest. I tried very hard not to stare. "Come inside," I shouted over the storm. "You'll catch your death." He hesitated for only a second before nodding. Inside my kitchen, the storm felt a world away. The only sounds were our dripping clothes and the frantic beat of my own heart. I handed him a towel, one of the good, fluffy ones. Our fingers brushed as he took it. This time, I didn't pull away immediately. His skin was cold from the rain, but there was a deep, latent warmth beneath it. "I'll make some coffee," I said, turning away to hide the flush I felt creeping up my neck. He toweled his hair dry, the rough motion making him seem even more vital, more alive in the quiet, domestic space of my kitchen. He looked out of place here, among my neatly arranged spice jars and minimalist art prints. He was an element of the wild brought indoors. We drank the coffee in a surprisingly comfortable silence, sitting at my small kitchen table. The rain drummed a soft rhythm against the windows. He had taken off his wet boots by the door, and in his socks, he seemed slightly less intimidating, more human. The metallic scent he usually carried was muted, replaced by the smell of rain and damp earth and the clean, simple scent of his skin. "You ever get tired of working alone?" he asked, his voice quiet in the post-storm hush. The question caught me off guard. It was the first personal thing he'd ever asked me. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a flicker of something in his hazel eyes. Not pity, but recognition. "Sometimes," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "The silence gets loud." He nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the steam rising from his mug. "Yeah, I get that." It was a small admission, a tiny crack in the stoic facade, but it felt monumental. For the first time, I felt like we weren't just a client and a contractor. We were two men, sitting in a quiet kitchen, admitting to a shared loneliness. The air between us shifted, the space charged with a new kind of tension. It wasn't just my own yearning anymore. It was something shared, something that hummed in the quiet air between us. After that day, things were different. The silence between us was no longer empty. It was filled with unspoken potential. The glances from the studio window were now met with a look from him, a gaze held for a fraction of a second too long. The professional distance had eroded, washed away by the storm. He started talking more, not much, but enough. He'd ask about my painting, pointing out a color I'd used. I'd ask about the properties of Corten steel, and he'd explain the oxidation process with a surprising passion. We were building a bridge across the space that separated us, one small, tentative plank at a time. The touches became less accidental. A hand on my arm to get my attention, his knee brushing against mine when we sat on the patio steps to look at the day's progress. Each instance was a tiny spark, and I was a landscape of dry kindling, terrified and hopeful that one of them might catch. My internal analysis went into overdrive. I was a man possessed, replaying every word, every look. He held my gaze for 3 seconds today, not 2. Does that mean anything? He smiled when I told that stupid joke. It was a real smile. It reached his eyes. I felt like a teenager with his first crush, my emotions raw and overwhelming. I was terrified of what I was feeling, and even more terrified of what would happen when the sculpture was finished, and he would pack up his tools and leave my life as suddenly as he had entered it. The silence he would leave behind would be 1,000 times heavier than before. The sculpture was nearing completion. It rose from the center of my garden like a strange, rust-colored creature, a physical manifestation of all the churning chaos inside me. It was beautiful, more beautiful than I had imagined. Cole had translated my 2-dimensional sketch into a 3-dimensional reality with a skill that was nothing short of artistry. He had poured his own quiet strength into it. We were working late one evening, trying to finish the final, most delicate weld. The sun had set, and the world had gone quiet around us. The only light came from the floodlight I'd set up and the brilliant, violent flare of the welding torch. The air was cool, and I could smell the night-blooming jasmine from the trellis near the fence. I was holding a piece of steel in place with a heavy clamp, my arms aching from the strain. Cole was a silhouette against the blinding white-blue light of the torch, a dark god forging worlds in my backyard. He was completely absorbed, his focus absolute. The shower of orange sparks cascaded around him, some of them landing on his leather apron with a faint sizzle. The sound was a sharp, electric hiss, a counterpoint to the chirping of the crickets in the grass. Then, it was over. He shut off the torch. The sudden, absolute silence was a shock to the system. It rushed into the void left by the hiss, pressing in on us. My ears rang. The only light was the soft glow from the floodlight and the cherry-red line of the fresh weld, slowly fading to black. He lifted his welding mask, and his face was slick with sweat, his eyes bright in the dim light. He looked from the sculpture to me, his expression unreadable. My heart is pounding. This is it. The last piece. Tomorrow, he'll clean up, I'll write him a check, and he'll be gone. The thought is a cold stone in my stomach. I have to say something. Anything. Thank you. It's perfect. It's more than I ever imagined. But the words are stuck in my throat, a useless jumble of gratitude and grief. He took a step closer, wiping his brow with the back of his gloved hand. The smell of ozone was thick in the air, sharp and clean. He was looking at me with that same intensity he gave the steel, as if he were trying to see right through me, to find the hidden supports and the stress points. He set the torch down on his workbench with a soft metallic clink. He didn't look away from me. "Leo," he said, his voice low and a little rough. I could only manage a nod, my throat tight. He gestured vaguely with his glove toward the cooling metal, toward the space where the sparks had just been flying. His eyes, however, stayed locked on mine. Do sparks always feel like this? The question hangs in the air between us. It's not about the weld. It's not about the metal. It's about the last few weeks. It's about the shared coffee and the accidental touches and the looks held too long. It's about the space between us that has become so charged it crackles with an energy more potent than any welding torch. My mind goes blank. Every witty retort, every casual deflection I've ever learned, abandons me. I am stripped bare, standing in my garden with my heart in my hands, and he is asking me if he feels it too. The hope I have so carefully suppressed is a wild, terrifying thing, clawing its way up my throat. I don't know what you mean. I lie, and my voice is a pathetic croak. It's a coward's response, a retreat to the safety of plausible deniability. He doesn't call me on it. He just takes another step closer. He's so close now I can feel the heat radiating from his body. I can see the tiny flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. He slowly pulls off his heavy work gloves, one finger at a time, his gaze never leaving my face. The sound of leather pulling away from skin is obscenely loud in the silence. "I think you do," he says, his voice softer now, but with an edge of certainty that unravels me. "I'm not talking about the metal, Leo. I'm talking about this." He gestures to the air between us. "Every time you look at me from that window, every time our hands brush, it feels like that." He points to the sculpture. "Like a live current. I am frozen. My carefully constructed world, with its neat categories and safe distances, is shattering around me. This straight metalworker I had filed away so neatly in my head is standing in front of me, speaking a language I thought only I understood. He sees me. He actually sees me. My fear is a cold, hard knot in my chest. Fear of being wrong. Fear of being right. Fear of what comes next. But beneath the fear, something else is rising. A fierce, desperate yearning to close the final few inches between us. To finally know if the fantasy I've been spinning in my head has any basis in reality. I take a breath. The air smells like jasmine and hot steel. I feel them. I finally admit. The words torn from me, raw and honest. Even when the torch is off, a slow smile spreads across his face. It's not a smirk, not a grin. It's a smile of pure, unadulterated relief, and it transforms his entire face, softening the hard lines and making him look years younger. It's the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. And then his hand is on my face. His bare hand, the one I'd watched Ben steal. It's rough and calloused against my cheek, but his touch is impossibly gentle. His thumb strokes my jawline, a slow, deliberate motion that sends a tremor through my entire body. He is real. This is real. "Good," he whispers. And he closes the distance. The kiss is not what I expected. It's not explosive or desperate. It's quiet. It's sure. It's a question and an answer all at once. His lips are firm and warm, and he tastes faintly of coffee and something uniquely him. It's a kiss of discovery, slow and methodical, as if he's mapping new territory. He is not rushing. He is learning the shape of me, and I am learning him. The stubble on his jaw is a rough, pleasant friction against my skin. My hands, of their own accord, come up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart through the fabric of his shirt. It's beating just as fast as mine. It is the end of the pretending, the end of the observation. It is the beginning of everything else. When he pulls back, he doesn't go far. He just rests his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. We stand like that for a long time, breathing the same air, our bodies finally connected. The silence that returns is not empty. It's a shared space, a sanctuary. It's filled with the quiet hum of reciprocation. He left not long after that. There was no awkward fumbling, no pressure for more. He simply squeezed my shoulder, his gaze warm and steady, and said, "I'll see you tomorrow," and I knew he wasn't just talking about packing up his tools. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my studio, staring out at the sculpture, a dark, powerful shape against the moonlit sky. It was a monument to the last few weeks, a testament to the man who had built it. I replayed the kiss, the conversation, his gentleness, over and over in my mind, searching for flaws, for signs I had misinterpreted everything. It felt too good to be true. Men like Cole didn't happen to men like me. I was the quiet artist who lived on the periphery. I was the observer, not the participant. I braced myself for the morning, for the inevitable moment when he would arrive and pretend last night was a strange, late-night aberration, a trick of the light. The dread was a cold pit in my stomach when I heard his truck pull into the driveway the next morning. I watched from the window, my coffee untouched, as he got out. He moved with the same deliberate pace as always. He wasn't rushing to get his equipment, though. Instead, he walked to my front door. The doorbell echoed through the silent house. My heart hammered against my ribs. This is it. The letdown. "I'm not gay. I was just curious" speech. I walked to the door like a man heading to his own execution. When I opened it, he was standing there, holding 2 cups of coffee from the diner downtown. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes were soft. He held one of the cups out to me. "I figured you might need this," he said, his voice the same low rumble as always. I took the cup, our fingers brushing. The familiar jolt was there, but this time it wasn't laced with anxiety. It was a current of reassurance. I looked from the coffee in my hand to his face, searching for any sign of regret. I found none. "Last night," he said, his voice dropping even lower, so I had to lean in to hear him. That wasn't a mistake, Leo. I just want you to be clear on that. Relief washed over me so intensely my knees felt weak. I could only nod, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. He didn't pack up his tools that day. He said he wanted to do a final check on all the welds, to clean the steel and apply a sealant. It was an excuse, and we both knew it. He was creating a reason to stay. We worked in a new kind of silence, a comfortable, easy quiet. We moved around each other with a new awareness. When he passed me a tool, his hand lingered. When I stood beside him to inspect his work, our shoulders touched, and neither of us moved away. The test came in the form of my next-door neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a retiree with an encyclopedic knowledge of everyone's business. He peered over the fence as Cole and I were standing close together, admiring the finished sculpture. "Quite the piece of work you got there, Leo," he called out, his eyes darting between me and Cole. "Your friend does good work." The pause before the word friend was laden with suspicion. I felt a hot flush of old shame and fear. My instinct was to step away from Cole, to create a safe, platonic distance. But before I could move, Cole's hand found the small of my back, a firm, proprietary, and utterly public touch. It was the same spot he'd touched to steady me on the ladder, but this time it wasn't functional. It was a statement. "Thanks," Cole called back to Mr. Henderson, his voice calm and even. Leo had the vision. I just put it together. He didn't remove his hand. He kept it right there, a warm, solid anchor in a sea of my own anxiety. Mr. Henderson grunted and disappeared back into his house. I looked at Cole, my heart swelling with a feeling so large it felt like it might break me open. He met my gaze, a question in his eyes. "You okay?" I gave him a small, watery smile and a nod. "I am now." In that simple, protective gesture, he had dismantled years of my own internalized fear. He wasn't ashamed. He wasn't hiding. Why should I? The job was finally, truly done. The last tool was packed in his truck. The garden was clean. The sculpture stood magnificent in the late afternoon sun, casting long, elegant shadows across the lawn. There were no more excuses. He stood by the open door of his truck, his keys dangling from his hand. The moment I had been dreading was here. The end. "Well," I said, my voice sounding hollow, "I guess this is it. Thank you, Cole, for everything." He didn't get in the truck. He just leaned against the door, watching me. "The check's on the kitchen counter," I added, feeling foolish. "I'm not worried about the check," he said. He took a step toward me, closing the distance between us again. "I have a question for you." "Okay, what's next?" I blinked. "Next? I don't have any other projects planned." He shook his head, a small, exasperated smile playing on his lips. "Not about a project, Leo. About us. What's next for us?" The directness of it stole my breath. There was no ambiguity, no room for misinterpretation. He was asking for a future, a conscious choice. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't overthink. I didn't analyze. I didn't retreat into the safety of my own head. I just felt. And what I felt was a profound, bone-deep certainty. "I was thinking," I said, a real smile finally breaking free. "We could start with dinner." His answering smile was slow and warm, and it reached all the way to his eyes. "I'd like that." That evening, we didn't go out. I cooked, and he sat at my kitchen table, telling me stories about growing up in a small town, about the first time he ever learned to weld. He talked, and I listened, and the kitchen filled with the smell of garlic and basil and the comfortable sound of his voice. It felt more intimate than any fancy restaurant could ever be. Later, we sat on the patio, drinking beer, our chairs close enough that our arms brushed. The sculpture was a dark sentinel in the twilight, a silent witness. The crickets chirped their nightly song. We didn't talk much, but the silence was perfect. It wasn't empty or lonely. It was full of promise. I looked at him, at the strong line of his profile against the fading light, and a sense of peace settled over me, so deep and complete it felt like coming home. The quiet, observant life I had built for myself hadn't been a prison. It had just been a waiting room. I had been waiting for the clang of steel, for the hiss of a torch, for the man who smelled like rain on iron. I had been waiting for the sparks. He turned and caught me looking. He didn't say anything. He just reached out and took my hand, lacing his rough, scarred fingers through mine. His hand was warm and solid and real. It was an anchor. And as we sat there in the quiet dark, I realized I was no longer just watching my life from a window. I was finally, truly in it. And it was more beautiful than anything I could have ever imagined.